So now let's go to our report. Okay, so this is our report. So these are some of the calc fields that we created last time. We took one date, we took one boolean, and we took one text. So let's try to create few more calculated fields with different functions, and let's see how we can do that. So again, for creating a calc field, we go into this task called create calculated. So this time, let's take aggregate related instances. So when do we use aggregate related instances? So let's say if there is any field that is returning more number of records and we want to aggregate them based on a certain condition, then we will use aggregate related instances. So for example, let's try to add something in our report. So for example, let me add it under worker. Let me bring it down, remove this. So under worker, for example, let's say we have locations. We will record sets, active locations, all locations. Okay, let's see. Let's test it. We'll say, okay, we still got only one field. So let me try to change the field. For example, I will say worker history. For example, let me test it. So if you see now here in worker history, we are getting multiple fields, multiple values, whereas for the other fields, all are single values. Okay. And moreover, if you see here, there are multiple fields related to multiple business processes. Like, for example, this is related to compensation change, but this is related to stock, and the other one are related to absence, right? So, in this case, if you want to group a related instance, then you will create a related instance calc field. So, let's use the same format. So, instead of concatenated text, I will use aggregate related instances for worker history. The business object I will select as worker and the function as aggregate related instance. When you click on OK, so in the source field, we will try to select whatever the field that we want to aggregate on. In this case, I will select worker history. Here you have two fields that you can populate. One is the condition, and the second is the fields to aggregate. So when you say condition, based on the condition, it will filter out the values from worker history. So let's say here we are getting 10 different values for worker history. So instead of 10, if you want to filter down based on a certain condition, you can provide that condition here, and this condition needs to be a boolean value or a boolean calculated field or a boolean field. It can be calculated field or it can be a workday delivered field, but it has to be a boolean field that should result true value. Based on that value, this worker history source field will be filtered, and you can choose what is the field that you want to aggregate for. So for example, let me search here. Let me see if we have any existing boolean fields. As you can see, these are all boolean fields. Either you can use one of them or you can create your own boolean field like we did in our earlier session, and you can filter out those instances. Okay. So in this case, let's say I want to filter on the events that are successfully completed. I do not want to skip or consider any events that are either in progress or cancelled. So I'll say status is successfully completed, and the fields to aggregate. Here also you can specify what is the field that you want to aggregate for. So you can search for different values here based on your need. If you want to check the business process type, for example, if you say okay, we will add it in our custom report, we'll save it. So if you see now, it just filters only on the values that met that particular condition instead of filtering for everything, and it gives what is the actual business process event type. So for example, here we mentioned fields to aggregate as the business process type. That's why all the business process types got aggregated. If you want to aggregate on some other value, you can change this value, and that value will be aggregated and will be shown as the output of that calculated field. So this is about aggregate related instance. Let's try some other function. So this time let's do arithmetic calculation. So again, put same naming convention, CFW. This time I'll put AC, that stands for arithmetic calculation. And this time we'll do higher date, or for example, date multiplied by, for example, not higher date, maybe years of service multiplied by. So again, I will select worker, arithmetic calculation. I will say okay. So for arithmetic calculation, the field type, it should be numeric, and you can optionally specify the rounding option. You have all these rounding options here. So you can optionally specify these options if you are dealing with any decimal values. So for now, I'll say round down to nearest one. And here you can specify year of service or whatever the field that you want to do the arithmetic calculation for. So for example, here we wanted to do years of service, and these are all the different operators that you can specify: add, subtract, multiply, and division. So here in our case, we are doing multiplication. Now we have to do multiply with 2, two times of years of service. So here, first you need to check in the global fields, in the numeric, if you have any value for 2. Let's see. If there isn't, then we can create, here we have, this is a 2. So if you do not have this 2 value, then you can create another text constant with value 2 and then use it here, save it. So our calc field got saved. So now let's try to add this in a. So first, years of service, which is the default one, and then calc field that does the multiplication. Orange alert whenever you have a lengthy XML alias name. So make sure the alias names are limited to less than 10 characters. So this we will discuss more on the XML alias names when we call these reports in Studio. But for time being, for the sake of this alert, make sure in your practice you can minimize the number of characters for the XML alias. So let's test it. If you see here, the actual years of service is 24, but our calc field, when we multiplied by 2, it returned twice. So this is, we can create arithmetic calculation. Now let's try to create another calculation. Build date we already explored. Concatenate text we already explored. Let's try convert currency. So here I'll say CC convert currency salary. Business object, I will select worker. I will select okay. So here in the convert currency, there are a couple of fields that we need to select. One is source currency amount field. So I'll say total base pay amount. The target currency is last, let's say, annualized currency. For example, you can specify as of date, maybe today minus 1 year or any date, and you can specify the currency rate type, whether it is current or quarterly average or any other value. So once you save it, add this report, save it, calculated value is showing up here. So this is how you do the currency conversion. Now let's try to create another is converting a text to number. So in most of the cases, we directly use number, but this function we will use whenever you have any value that is stored as a text, and if you want to convert it to a numeric, then you can use this function. Here I will say convert text to number, say any random text. I will create it on worker, save it. So here you can specify, like, for example, maybe I'll take hire date, entry date of hire. For example, if you take this and decimal separator, you can specify. I'll just leave it default and you save it. If you try to add this in the report, save it due to the limit on the XML unit test. Okay, so here is the value that we are trying to convert to a number. But if you see, this has slashes, which is not a numeric character. That is why it is showing an error saying that this is not a valid value. So let's go back and change our text field. So in this case, what I will do, I will choose any global text fields. See if we have one, maybe this one, 0 to 3 months. Let's try. So I cancel test again. Okay, so in this also we have something called 0 to 3 months as the value. So this is also an invalid value. So let's see if we can pull some other text field that has, let's say, I'll randomly type 3. This is a format date, 3 Wednesday, 3 to 6 months. Still, what address postal code, for example, because postal code mostly will be numeric. So let's try to do that. Okay, so it worked. As you can see here, this is the postal code, which is actually on a text field in Workday, though it is numeric. You can see here the field type is text. So these type of fields, we can convert them to number, and that number can be shown here. Let's go back here and we'll try to create few more calculated fields. Count related instances. So here we can use the same example of this worker history. So if you see here in the worker history, these are all the different values that we have, but it is not showing the count of how many values it has. So like it is showing only less 5, more 5, but it is not showing the exact count of it. So it is somewhere like 10 or 11, but it is not showing the count. So in order to show the count of the values that this field has, we can use count related instances. So let's see count related instances. Worker history, business object will be worker, and the related field we will select worker history. You can optionally select either you can bring the count of all instances, or you can also filter down any specific instances that you want to filter. Again, here, this can be a Boolean value. As you can see here, this supports only Boolean value. So for example, if I take the same one, status is successfully completed. I want to filter only on these instances. I will say, okay, I will copy this, will edit. Let me add here, fine, let me test it. So now you see here, the count related instances, it took 363. So this is the count that we got. But this one it is 355, this one it is 310. So that's how you can populate any count that you want to populate. Okay, now let's try to create another calculation using, see what we did before. Okay, so let's try to create maybe a day difference. For example, this will try to bring up the difference between two dates. So let's try to do that. For example, date difference. Let's say if we want to bring up the date difference between an employee's birth date versus their hire date. Let's see how we can do that. I will select worker. I give some name. I'll say okay. So here you can specify what is the start date and what is the end date. And then you can specify whether you want to return the difference in years, months, or days. So here I will specify birth date, date of birth, and then I will specify rate of hires. What happened? And then I want to see in terms of years. So I'll keep this as it is. I'll click on OK. Now I'll copy this, add it into our report, and I'll try to save it. Let's test. So you see here the difference between the worker's date of birth and the hire date in terms of years is what we got here. So this is how you can build the difference between any two date fields. And we will try evaluate expression. So this is one important calc field that will be used typically in most of the use cases. So in evaluate expression, whenever we want to bring or populate certain value based on a certain condition, like if else, if you see it in terms of any coding language, if a value is this, bring down this, else if a value is this, bring up this value, something like that. If not, then bring up a default value. So in our case, what we will do, we will try to bring up the value, a certain value based on let's see, for example, based on the location. For example, if the employee's location is so and so, we will populate a different value like a mapping. If the employee value is New York, we will populate it as 2. If the employee location is San Francisco, we will populate as 1. And for all other locations, we will populate as maybe 10, for example, or 0. So if you want to build those kind of condition rules and populate the value, then we will be using evaluate expression. So let's try to build one. So EE, which is evaluate expression for location. We'll give worker evaluate expression and I'll say okay. So here for evaluate expression, we have to specify the field type. So in our case, we are trying to return 1, 2, or any numeric field based on the location. So I will try to select numeric and the default value. We will come to this, but before that, let's try to see what are the condition and the return value. So as I mentioned in our use case, if the location is San Francisco, we will populate a value 1. So let's see how to do that. So in the condition, you have to specify if the location is San Francisco. And then in the return value, we have to specify the numeric value 1. So here it should be a Boolean value, a Boolean calculated field, or a Boolean Workday delivered field. And here the return value should be a numeric calculated field or a numeric Workday delivered. So here in the condition, now I have to add if the location is San Francisco. So what I will do, let me see if there is any calc field that is already built for San Francisco, if the location is San Francisco. So seems like there is no calculated field that is available or no Boolean value, either Workday delivered or any existing calculated field that is there for me to use. Now, in this case, what I would do, I would create one more calculated field. So here I will click on the create calculated field, and I would create a Boolean calculated field, because in the condition we need a Boolean calculated field which is a true or false. So I will say the name as, I don't know if my spelling is correct, but you can ignore that. So I'll create it on the worker. The function again as a bool, it should be a Boolean field. As you already know, it should return true. And this is the field name. So let me click on OK. And here, as you typically create a Boolean field, let's say location in the list, in the value, you can say San Francisco. So this Boolean field will return true if the location is San Francisco. So this Boolean field will return false for any other location. So I'll save it. So once I save it, you observe here the created calculated field, it got automatically populated. Or if you want to search for a different field, you can also remove this and search for a different field. So now we got the condition, which means location is San Francisco. So in this case, we have to return 1. So I will see if there is a value called 1, it is there. So I will select. Otherwise, same thing. I would go create a calc field of maybe, let's say, a text constant of 1, or maybe a numeric constant of 1, and then save it here, select it here. So now my first rule is built. If the location is San Francisco, I will get a value of 1. Now, if the location is, let's say, New York, we need 2. So I will do the same thing. Now here, I have the Boolean for if the location is San Francisco, but I do not have any calculated field for New York. So here what I can do, I can click on this arrow so that that calculated field will open up for me here. Can copy this name as well, and I go to the related actions, the 3 dot buttons, and I go to calculated field, and I can copy this calculated field. So as soon as I copy, everything gets copied automatically, and I just need to change the name of this new calc field, and instead of San Francisco, I will say New York. That's it. I'll save it. Now my new calc field is ready. So this I'll copy and I will paste it here. So now I got 2 booleans. Now here I need to select a return value. So let's say 2. I already have 2. So I will select 2. So now my rule is built. If the location is San Francisco, I should get 1. If the worker location is New York, I should get 2. But what if the worker location is not San Francisco or New York? Here, okay, for this one, for example, then what I will say, I will default to 0. Okay, I will select 0 here. I will default to 0 for any other locations other than San Francisco and New York. If you want to do that, the default you have to specify here, and it is mandatory. And the way this evaluate expression works is, first it will check this condition, the first row, the first boolean in this grid, in this table. Once this is evaluated, if this returns true, it will stop checking for the rest of the rows. You can add multiple items here. There is no limit to it. So if after checking this first Boolean value, if this returns true, then this will be pulled up and that's the end of the process. But if this returns false, then it checks the second row. If this returns true, this value will be pulled up. If this returns false and there are no more rows, so it will go directly to the default value. So that's how this calc field will function. So let me save it and we'll try to add this in our report. Okay. And let's save it. This is again an alert for the length of the name. It's a soft alert, so we can ignore it. So if you see here, for San Francisco location, we got 1 and 2 New York. And similarly, where is our Chicago? This is our Chicago. We got 0. So this is how the evaluate expression will work. And this is the most commonly used calc field for most of the requirements. Okay. And now let's try to explore evaluate expression band. So let's try to consider the same example it for location. So in this case, let me show again. So now I'm creating a calculated field on eval expression band. Now what this means is that in this calc field, it will, let me show you. So if you see, it will only allow you to add text values as the default value or the return value. You will not be able to select any value which are already available. So for example, if I want to achieve the same functionality through this eval band, I will do the same thing. Here, instead of selecting it from the list, I can enter a static value here and condition. I can do the same thing. See here, our calc field got pulled up, and here I can select 1 New York. I can type in, let's say, whatever the value that I want. Here also I can type in whatever the value that I want, and I will save it. So the difference is the band allows you to define the return values as a constant text. You no need to define or store this value anywhere else in order to pick up, unlike the eval expression. So eval band allows you to type in your own values that should return based on the condition. So here, if the location is San Francisco, this will return me 1. If it is New York, it will return me this, or it will return me this. So let's try to quickly add it, and we will save it. Test. You can see here, these are the values that we are getting. Let's explore a few other functions. We extract multi-instance. So this is again one of the important function that will be mostly used. So in this extract multi-instance, what happens is when you have multiple values, like for example, for this one, you have a lot of values here, and but you do not need all these values. You only need maybe, let's say, compensation change. For example, from this, you want to, this worker history has a lot of values. From that, you want to extract couple of values, like only the items that are related to compensation change, not maybe bonus or any other items. Then you can create extract multi-instance. So let's see how to achieve that. So I'll say EMI, which is extract multi-instance. I'll say worker history, business object on worker. So for extract multi-instance, you have different operation types. So for example, the source field 1, I can type in worker history, and in the condition, I can give a Boolean value that extracts the multi-instance. So here, if you see the operation type, there are a couple of operations that you have. The default is the subset, which means from the worker history, if you want to filter any values based on a certain condition, maybe a subset of values from worker history, then you can provide a condition. Based on that condition, that subset will be pulled from the worker history. Now, let's say you have union. Now, when you say union, here you can actually combine two different fields and populate it as one field. That is the union. And the other one is the intersection. Intersection is when you have two different fields here, and you want to bring only the common values that are present in both of the fields, then you will use intersection. And when you say except, so it will identify only the values that are not available in source field 2, and it will bring out those values. So these are all the different operations that you can perform. So for now, let's take the subset simple one, and I'm taking in the worker history for our example, I will be taking, or I will be pulling up only the compensation change events, for example. So let me see if I have any. Yep, I already have one calculated field that brings us that. Let me open this Boolean calc field to show you what this is about. So this says this is a true or false, which is a Boolean value. It says business process type is this. Either it can be request compensation change, propose hire, or this one of this. So if I select this calculated field, since it is already there, I am reusing it. If not, I would have gone and created another calculated field. So here, one thing you have to remember, whatever the calculated field that you are creating on the condition has to be created on the action event business object. Like for example, when you change this source field, the RBO, the related business object, will be auto-populated. Once it is auto-populated, you have to create the following conditions or whatever the fields that you're planning to use on this object, not on the worker. So that's why you see here this condition is built on the event business object, because here it is asking us to build or place the conditions that are available on action event related business object. This is an important point to note. So let me save it. Now let me copy, edit the report, try to add, save it, test. As you can see here in the worker history, we have absence and a lot of other things, but based on our condition, it pulled up only compensation change events, not everything. So that's how you can pull up the multi-instance calculated fields based on your operation type. Okay. So now there is one more calc field function called extract single instance. So what does that mean is, if you have a multi-instance calculated field, then if you want to extract a single value out of it, then you can use extract single instance. So for example, here we have a lot of compensation change events, but I need only the latest compensation change event that happened for this employee. So let's see how to do that. Now, since we already created this extract multi-instance worker history that has all these compensation change events, we will try to reuse this calc field for our extract single instance. So instead of EMI, I will say ESI, which is extract single instance, and I will select worker. Here I will say extract single instance. Now in the source field, I will try to give the multi-instance that we have to, where we have to extract our single instance on. So our source field will be the multi-instance. From this multi-instance, we have to extract one single instance, which should be the latest compensation change event. So again, we have to filter on the condition. So in this case, this multi-instance field is already filtered on the compensation change event. So I no need to create, enter, or create any new condition rule to specify it should bring only compensation change events. If this multi-instance was not there, then I would have created, selected worker history like this, and added a condition here to fetch only session change. So this also works. Both are same. So there we have already created the condition inside this multi-instance. So we got only the compensation change events. Here, if you want to specify condition here, then you can specify worker history here and then filter out the instances. Anything will work. The sort field, I will say sort by effective date, and the sort direction should be descending, and it should be the first instance. So which means if there are 5 different compensation change events with different effective dates, it will sort by the date. It will pick the latest one. If you want the oldest row, you can pick the last occurrence. But in our case, we are looking at the latest compensation change event. So we will sort from highest effective date to the lowest, and then we will pick the first one. So this is how you create. So let's see what this brings up. Okay, test it. So you see here in extract single instance, we only got the single value, but we do not know what is the effective date of it. It just brings the instance. So from this instance, if I have to pull the effective date and show it, then I can use one more function called lookup related value, related value. So this I will say LRV comp change. I will say worker. So here my lookup field will be the ESI field that I created. You can only use single instance fields here. You will not be able to use multi-instance fields in the lookup field. So in the return value, I need effective date. So I will select effective date, which means from the single instance that I got from this event, I am trying to pull the effective date. So let's see. We will add it into our report. Let me save it. Let me test it. So if you see, so let me open this compensation change event in a different tab to check if it is the right value. If you see here, so this compensation change event is effective on 1/1/2017, and that is the value that we got here. So this is how you pull the values that are inside this instance. So you can pull like effective date, you can pull any other attribute on this event or this instance like employee, position, reason, next pay period. You can pull any of these values using lookup related value function. This is one of the critical function that will be used 90% of the for 90% of the use cases, because most of the direct fields are not easily available. So we have to look up through multiple levels of fields and then identify what should be the return value. I can create a chain of lookups. Like for example, I have created the lookup field on this ESI. I can return one more ESI. And on top of the ESI, I can create one more lookup that may return another ESI. That chain can continue until you get the actual value that you are looking for. So that's why the lookup related value is a critical component. Let me close this and let's try to explore a few other functions. So let's say lookup increment or decrement date. So if we want to increment or decrement any date value, then we can use this. So for example, increment decrement date. For example, if you want to add hire date plus 3 months, I want to add 3 months to the hire date. Then on the worker, select OK. So the date field will be hire date. Here you have the option to either add years to add or subtract, or months or days. In our use case, we are trying to add hire date plus 3 months. So I have selected hire date here. In the months, I will select 3. So if you select positive integer 3, this is a positive, it will do the addition. If you select -3, so this is a negative value, so this will do the subtraction. So here I want to add, so I will select a positive 3 and I will say okay. I will copy this, get here, save it, test it, say okay. So if you see here, it added 3 months to the hire date and it brought up this value. So that's how this calculated field will work. You see here, the actual date of joining is 1/1/2000. Since we added 3 months, it gave 4/1/2000. So that's how you add any months or subtract any months on a date. It can be years. You can add even number of days. You can drill down to like hours, minutes, and seconds as well. Okay. Let's try, for example, format date. So for example, in this case, whatever the calculation that we did on adding plus 3 months, I want to show only the month part of it. I do not want to show the rest of the component, or maybe I want to show in a different format like YYYY Let's say this is not in a maybe users desired format. So I can change this format. So I'll copy the YYYY I'll just keep the name as YYYY and I'm selecting worker and the function as format date. Let's say okay. So for format date, we have two things. One, the actual date field, which is nothing but the calc field that we just created that adds up hire date plus 3 months and the format that we want to use. So here, if you see, there are different formats that you can select. For example, if you select maybe year and a month and say okay, and you copy this, edit the report, save the report. So if you see here, this is the format that we selected. This is the Workday delivered, one of the Workday delivered format, year-month. So it gave us year-month. Now, in case you do not want to select any Workday defined format, you want to select your own format like YYYYMMDD. Then I'll go to the calculated field. I can edit from this list. I will check if I have any YYYYMMDD format. I do not. So I can create a format mask. So as soon as you select format mask, it gives you the option to enter the format mask. So if you hover over on this format mask, like right now it's not showing up, but if you hover over on this field, it will tell you what value you need to enter in order to get what is the value. For example, if you enter small y as shown in the top row, you will get the year. So I need to enter YYYY for my case so that I will get the year as 2000. Next, I need my month. So if you observe in the second row or second line, for the month, I need to enter capital M twice. For example, if I need to get that 08 as shown here, I need to enter capital M twice. Now finally I need the date in 2-digit. So if you see here, for the date again, I need to enter small d. So dd. Now let me save it. Now since this calculated field is already added and we have edited it, so I'll just try to refresh the browser and the report data gets refreshed. If I scroll to the right, as you can see here, this is the format that we need. YYYY04 is nothing but the month and 01 is the date. So this is how you can convert the date from one format to another format. Okay. So let's try to create a format text. Before that, we can even try format number. So now we have seen how the date format worked. So similar to this, we can also format the numeric fields. So let's say, for example, I want to format. So format number, okay? Format number. What is the number that we will take? For example, years of service, okay? And I will select worker and okay. So in the format number, I will select here source field as years of service, and this I can choose these different formats. These are the different formats that are available that I can choose from. But if you see here, similar to what we had for date calculated format, date field format, we do not have any custom masking. So I need to select one of this format. So let's say I just selected this randomly, and so this is, you can optionally select. If it is a 0, it should show blank. Otherwise, if you want to show 0, then you can uncheck this and say okay. Let me copy this and edit. Okay, let me save it. Test. So if I go to the right hand side, as you can see how the format has happened based on the selected format. If you see here, after the number, it gave comma. After 2 digit dot 3 decimal, it added percentage. And this is how you will format your number. So as we were discussing, you can choose a different format based on your requirement. Okay. Now let's try to see how we can format a text. So let's select format text. I will say format text, maybe a name, for example. I want to format the worker's name. So I have selected text. Okay. Source field, I will select name of the worker. And in the options here, also I have only 4 options. So I can select the lowercase. I can select a proper case. By default, Workday gives us in the proper case. So for example, if you see this one, Norman Chan or Pedro Santiago, it's already in proper case. So there's no point in selecting the proper case. But if at all, for any data as part of validation, if you're seeing any data that is not coming in the proper case, then you can create this calc field and convert that into a proper case. So in this case, I will try to select maybe all uppercase. For example, let's say I want to show the worker name only in uppercase. So let's try to edit. As you might be observing, as we are adding more and more fields to this report, the report is taking a bit time, either in terms of saving or editing. So you have to make sure that your report has very less length restrictions on these names so that your report is performant. Okay. Let's see how our format worked. You see here. So this is how the text format worked. If I would have given the lowercase, then all these would have came in lowercase. So this is how we format the dates, numbers, and the text. Let's go back and see if we can explore any other important functions. So another important function that we can explore is the lookup value as of date. So for example, if you want to identify what is my designation as of my last year, or what is my designation before 6 months, right? Then you can use this function to identify that particular value as of date. So by default, any field that you add onto your report will bring the value as of the current date. It will not look up into the history. But if you want to look up into the history, go back into the history and see what is the value. It can be either history or it can be in future as well. For example, if I want to look up my designation, maybe for the after, maybe I have already got a promotion and my designation was already keyed in, which is effective after a couple of months. If I want to look up that value as well, I can use this function and provide the date so that it will return me the designation or the value as of the date. So let's see, for example, I will say lookup value as of date, the designation, and I will select worker. So here in the source field, I will say my job title and I want to look it up as of maybe last year, for example, minus 1 year. And so there are two options that you can specify. You can look up this value as of when it was effective, or you can also look up the value when it was actually entered in the system. In this case, I want to see the value when it was effective, like maybe before 1 year. So I will say, okay, I will copy this, I will edit this, save it, will test it. So if you see here, this will give me the value or my designation that I had before 1 year. So this is how you do lookups on based on a specific date. Either it can be past or it can be in future. Okay. Let's see what other important functions that we typically use. So another one is the substring. So let's try to see, for example, in the same designation, for example, if I want to extract only the first two characters, I will say substring text st. We will type in worker and say okay. So in the text field, I will enter on what field I want to do the substring. So I want to do the substring on job title, and you can specify if you have any delimiters in your designation, you can specify that. For example, here you have come. So if you specify after a delimiter, and if you select a delimiter here, like maybe in the global fields, in the text, I will select this is a come, right? So I'll select a come, and the direction is forward. So let's explore how this works. If I copy this and add it, save it, okay, let me test the report. So if you see here, what we have selected, we have asked this calc field to take the job title and search for this comma, and whatever the text that is there after the comma, output that text in the forward direction. So which means if you see here in this designation, there is no comma. So it given an empty value. Whereas in this designation, you see there is a comma, which is our delimiter. And we have asked it to look forward and get the value. So which means it will search for the forward value after the comma, which is workforce planning. And that's what the value that we got here. And if you see here, there is also an option to remove leading and trailing spaces. Since we marked it as yes, whatever the space that we have here after the comma, that got removed, and the rest of the text got populated here. For example, if I want to pull the value before the comma, like this value, director, then what I can do, I can go edit this calculated field. So instead of forward, I will select backward and select OK. Now let me reload the report. So if I go here, oops, it is not working. Oh, I think I have done it incorrectly. So let me go back to the edit. So what I need to do here is to select before a delimiter. Earlier we have selected after a delimiter. Now I am selecting before a delimiter. And then I will select the same comma and I will say okay, and let me refresh the report. So now if you see, it pulled up the director value. Okay. Now, for example, there might be another use case where I want to pull only first few characters of the designation of or any text, for example. So in that case, I can choose a different type here. I will choose fixed position. So as soon as you select fixed position, it will ask you what is the length and what is the starting character. So starting character, I will give it as 1, which means it should start selecting from the first position and what is the total length that it should select. I'll say 5. So either you can specify fixed length or you can specify until end of text. So let's see if I gave as 1 and 5, how it comes up. Here I will refresh again. So as you see here, it started from 1, like we gave the starting character position, and it selected 5 characters from the text. So in case if you do not specify the fixed length as 5 and selected the checkbox select until the end of the character, then it would select everything from that position. So this is how we do the substring. Now let's try text length, for example, or text. Yeah, let's try with text length. So for the same designation, if I want to calculate the text, so I will copy this, just the name. I will go here. Instead of lookup value, I will say text length. I will select worker. So in the text field, I will choose maybe job title. So I need to know how many characters this job title has. Then I can say, okay, I'll copy it here and will save it. Let me test. See here, this will give me the length of this text field. So that's how you can calculate the length of a given text. So, and I think we can check one last important function, which is the text constant. Like we've been talking about creating constants in previous calc fields. So this is how you create a text constant. It's a very simple calc field. There is not any complex logics involved. So I'll say TC, which is a text constant. For example, let's say I want to create a text constant called 0 to higher, maybe to identify something. So here, any constant, instead of creating it on the worker business object, you need to you can even create it on the worker business object, but when you create a text constant on a particular business object or any other calc field, for example, you will only be able to access that calc field or that constant on only on that object. You will not be able to access on any other object. Since constants are same across the tenant, so you can create it on the global business object, which means when you create this calc field on a global business object, you will be able to pull it on any other business object. So let me save it. So here you can enter whatever the value that you are trying to save as a constant. Now you can refer this anywhere in your tenant. So for example, here I have created it on a global business object, but our report is based on the worker business object. But still, I will be able to pull up that calculated field on my worker business object. So if I search for that, it will come. So let me save it. So you see here, this is a text constant that appears for each worker. So these are all some of the important calculated fields that we typically use for most of the requirement. And you can practice on creating these calculated fields using all these different functions. You can explore all these different functions and get some good hands on when you do the practice in the as part of the lab activity. So that's all for this session.